Welcome. I apologize again for the necessity of putting this class online tonight. Stuff comes up for me quite a bit, unfortunately. But the good news for y'all is that, well, I guess if you are happy that in-person class was canceled, then all of this is good news for you. But if that was a trouble to you, that I canceled or put the class online tonight, you can at least rest assured that, or feel better about knowing that one of the reasons that I try to be as flexible as I do try to be with students in terms of grades and just trying to be understanding of their situations in life is because I know that a lot of times given the size of my family, just statistically, I have a greater likelihood than most of having stuff come up, especially family stuff. So anyway, I try to be as accommodating to y'all as I can in hopes that you all can try to return the favor. Obviously, you have less say in the matter than I do, but that's kind of the reason I try to be proactive about being accommodating so that it's at least a little bit fair. All right, so this is not a particularly long chapter in terms of the material in the PowerPoint. And as we move through it, you will see right away in this chapter how easy it is, or well, I should say how easy it could be for you to get really focused on memorizing kind of flow charts or lists or definitions of things like that. You'll see that a lot of what we cover is that. You'll see that a lot. But as we go through, and hopefully we'll have a few weeks left at the end of the semester. If not, the last 4 or 5 weeks of the semester, we'll try to incorporate some actual audit work into the class. There's some good material within the textbook in terms of fictional set of financials and just some stuff to look at. But when we get to that point, and as you're learning the material, again, I would encourage you to, as you obviously for the CPA portion, the CPA portion of the audit, or I should say the audit portion of the CPA exam. Yes, you do need to memorize these lists, and I'll try to highlight that as we go. But in terms of if you actually want to be an effective auditor once you get done with school, because remember, this is something that I think everyone kind of forgets, or at least a lot of people forget or try not to remember. But while graduating is an accomplishment, it really is more of a stepping stone than it is an end goal, right? Because ideally, most people are using their degree as a stepping stone to a better career or a different career or specific career that requires this type of education. So if you're going into auditing or accounting in general, then obviously you need to get the education, but you can very easily, and it's not even hard to do, you can very easily get the education without getting much out of the education. So you can take the classes, and I know a lot of you have had several classes with me, and obviously I am not horribly difficult for a professor, and especially within accounting. So I haven't forced you to learn it to a certain level. I've tried to present the material and give you the opportunity to learn as best as you want, but it's really not my nature to force feed this type of stuff to people. But anyway, I say that because the onus or the responsibility is on you guys in terms of becoming or having the skill set you need to be good at this stuff when you get out of school. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because none of you are going to be very good at this stuff when you get out of school, at least not nearly as good as you will be once you're practicing for a while. But I guess long story short, if you are interested in becoming good at this stuff in addition to getting a good grade and passing the CPA exam, then while we go through this stuff and you see the lists and you make note of what to memorize, also make some notes, at least in your head, or give some active thought to what the book encourages in Chapter 1, and that is just kind of analyzing the various scenarios that we look at, not just memorizing the formulaic stuff that is required within the standards. All right, so talking about auditors today, obviously, we'll pretty much be doing that the whole class. But specifically looking at the various types of auditors, you see here, well, external auditors would be auditors that are not working as an employee of the company that they are auditing. And that typically means you're required to have a certain level of independence from the company. So not just that you are not getting a W-2 and working 40 hours a week on site, but there are other ways that you could be connected to the company that would kind of preclude you from being an external auditor. And internal auditors are people generally who work for the company directly, W-2'd by the organization mostly, meaning just that they are considered employees and not independent contractors. And then you have government auditors. Obviously, that doesn't need a lot of explanation. And then forensic auditing is actually what a lot of people, before forensic auditing was really even that developed of a specialty, that's kind of what a lot of people viewed the auditing profession as in general. Because forensic auditing is more like the cops and robbers type deal where we're approaching something with the idea of looking for fraud, looking for a type of crime, essentially. Whereas the other types of auditors, all three of the ones we see in this slide, government, external, and internal, they are obviously going to report on fraud if they see it, but that is not their main job. Whereas forensic auditors, they really are. It's kind of an adversarial process. They are investigating. Look at them as like a detective investigating a crime. Obviously, there's a level of adversarialness. I don't even know. Adversariality, I guess maybe is how you say that, between forensic auditors and the entities that they're auditing on the same level as perhaps a detective and a crime suspect. And a lot of people misbelieve that type of adversarial nature exists in all of these areas of auditing, where generally in all these other three areas, auditors, yes, are trying to make sure that everything's done correctly, but the attitude is one more of helpfulness in these professions versus I'm going to find out what you did wrong and catch you here in forensic. Excuse me. These are just some of the main types of services that you would see for audit, attest, and insurance services. The types of services that an auditing firm would typically provide. And we went over some of these before. The only thing I think we may not have talked about last week is these non-audit services, mainly because you don't as often see auditors performing these non-audit services anymore since the advent of Sarbanes-Oxley. But back in the day, this non-audit services were actually, because of the profit margin on some of these items, they were very high profit margin. And so these ended up contributing, especially for the big four firms, leading up to the stuff that sparked the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. But leading up to that, non-audit services often accounted for more revenue than the audit services associated with the same firms. But obviously, if you go to an accounting firm that is a big enough firm that it requires you to specialize as an employee, you will generally be choosing between an audit career path and kind of a non-audit career path. And these are broken up as well, but most often you would hear tax, prep and planning versus audit as your career choices going into a big accounting firm, which leads us into the discussion of accounting firms. So if you read your chapter, your book tells you that the vast majority of Fortune 500 companies are audited by the Big Four. I don't remember exactly what the number is, but when you get into the high dollar valued big public companies, so I think revenues upwards of 500 million and above, then the Big Four handles virtually all of those clients. And the main reason for that is obviously the bigger the company, the more important it is for them to have investor confidence, because obviously the bigger the company generally, and obviously this doesn't always hold true, but at least categorically in the larger companies, you're dealing with larger needs of capital, and so therefore there's a very high level of importance placed on the maintenance of public trust and faith in your business. And so you can see that obviously it's logical that the Big Four are probably going to charge the most for their services because they have the best reputation. They're the biggest, most prestigious, so you wouldn't want to necessarily go there unless you had a reason to pay that much, excuse me, or to just pay at the upper end of the spectrum of charges. But obviously, if you are a giant company, it is going to be definitely worth it to you to pay the fees associated with audits from these firms, because these are the ones that are going to instill the greatest level of investor confidence. Then you've got mid-tier, these three here, Grant Thornton, BDO Seidman, RSM McGladrey, that do a little bit, basically the leavings of the public companies that the Fortune 500 big level public companies that the Big Four can't or doesn't want to handle, or perhaps via some connection that someone in one of these firms has, they've managed to get one or two of the bigger clients away from the Big Four. Outside of those 7 firms, though, pretty much unheard of for a large publicly traded firm to be getting audits done elsewhere. However, obviously, that large of a level of a publicly traded company is a very small percentage of the overall number of companies out there. So we have various scattered regional and local firms. And as you can imagine, as you move from Big Four to mid-tier to regional to local, you're essentially going from potentially the highest level of complexity down to the lowest level of complexity, essentially mom and pop type shops. At least if you're talking about one of the larger regionals, and then mid-tier and Big Four, if you're at those levels, then this little chart of duties for the various employees associated with the audit probably has more relevance. As you get into smaller firms, like manager and senior are often consolidated, or you have a partner basically doing a lot of the stuff that the manager would be doing, and then maybe 1 or 2 of the manager's duties would be pushed down to the senior. But you almost always have a partner, a senior, and staff, various, usually associates or whatever you want to call them, down here. Okay, so obviously for y'all, when you get out of school, you would generally assume you don't have any experience, come in at this level, And so because of, if you look at the responsibilities assigned to you here, let's say that your only job is working on audits. Well, at the associate level, you really don't have a lot of responsibilities. You're essentially receiving assignments from your senior and going and doing them. Like, hey, go make sure that all of these receipts match up in this file, match up to all of the items that they were supposed to pay with. Little jobs like that is essentially how you're going to be filling your day at the associate level. So I only say that to stress that even though I've kind of tried to scare you, I guess, not really scare you, but like tried to convince you that it might be wise to get better at these things instead of just focusing on memorization so that you can pass and then pass the CPA exam, just so you can get out there and actually be doing the work once you hit the ground. But to kind of level the expectations a little bit, I am throwing it out there that you're not going to be expected to do high-level stuff as a first, second, third year employee. So you're not the one who's basically doing, if you look at all these bullet points, all of the planning, all of the responsibility, everything is at someone's level above you. So as long as you have attention to detail and you can follow directions of the person above you, and hey, if you understand some accounting, all the better, and if you have all these principles of these audit principles memorized, bonus points. But from the auditing firm standpoint, to get some money's value out of you, there's really not a lot of background necessary right at the outset. Obviously, any background you have is going to aid in judgment. It's going to aid in any number of things. No firm's going to hire you without having that background. Obviously, I'm not saying any of that. Just basically saying, get as much out of school as you can. Get as close to being able to pass the CPA as you can in school. But don't only have those things be your end goals. Try to just day to day get better at what you do throughout your career, not just leading up to it. So I know we've talked about Sarbanes-Oxley. If you've had me, I know I talk about it in every class various times. But this is basically slides just setting the stage for the fact that, or the lead up to these big scandals that caused Sarbanes-Oxley to be necessary. It was basically, like I was saying before, high margin, high profit margin is what they mean by that. Non-audit services ended up being more valuable to these firms than the audit fees themselves. So obviously, if the golden goose is the non-audit services, then you're going to be really tempted, even if the audit looks really bad, or if someone propositions you and says, hey, from the company, I need the audit to look better, even though you've discovered X, Y, Z. And your option is to say, heck no, we're going to give you a bad audit opinion. And it's all well and good to say that, but if you're losing not only perhaps millions of dollars in audit fees, but also an even higher profit margin, larger amount of money in non-audit services for doing that, it just ratchets up the temptation level to tempt these auditors to try and stay in bed with these companies because they're adding so much to the auditor's bottom lines. So Enron, WorldCom, all these scandals happened right around the same time, and a lot of that is speculated to be because of the environment that was going on in this time frame, where it was just so, if you looked at a graph, the amount of money that these firms were making on these audit services actually probably would have been more of a parabola there, more of a exponential growth. But there was a lot of growth in these things, and so temptation level went up, and a lot of these auditing firms became embroiled in these scandals. So in order to ensure that the United States system of doing of capital markets, the stock exchanges, were able to still function in a semi-normal manner, that required Congress to act and to go out there and regulate in a way that restored investor confidence. Or at least that was the idea behind both the 2002 Sarbanes-Oxley Act and then also the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 that came after the big real estate crises sprang up. So I talked about this a little before, but basically this slide is just saying, hey, an auditor, by the nature of their job, is not looking at everything. So because of that, there's no way for them to be able to guarantee that you're getting that you are 100% getting an accurate picture of what went on with the company. They're only able to provide a reasonable assurance. Now, that doesn't mean that it's just kind of 50-50. It means, hey, we've done a pretty dang good job of checking things and sampling in a way that's scientific so that we can try and ensure that the outcome that we perceive by our samples is the actual outcome of what should be shown on the audit. When you hear context of financial statement auditing, that basically just means what industry is this audit being done in. Obviously, you can see the slides talking about salmon farms, fish farms in Alaska versus an NBA team. Those are pretty widely distinct industries, so obviously they're not going to have the same processes, they're not going to be anything near the same thing. This is different as you could be in terms of industries, environments, etc. So of course, if you just have some formulaic way of doing things that you try to apply in every context, that's not going to work out. You have to be specifically looking at the context of that particular scenario. So before I move on from that, I real quickly want to bring up, I don't remember if there's any more slides that talk about this or not, but this is a big area where a lot of accounting people, and I bring it up because it's important in terms of planning, but through the auditing career track, and because of this context idea, a lot of accounting people that go up through auditing end up taking exit opportunities from their accounting firm and going from a Big Four firm to one of these private industries to be an in-house person, like maybe a CFO or a controller or some high-level executive, based on the fact that you have this experience, you have this knowledge of the industry that you've built through doing audits in that world. And obviously that's valued by these entities, but I bring it up to you because when you all are deciding what to do with your careers at this point, trying to decide where you want to start, where you want to end up, keep in mind that if your end goal is not to be in an accounting firm, and your end goal is to get into some specific industry as a financial person within that industry, as a CFO or some other high-level financial executive, you really need to make sure that you're getting on with an audit firm. If this is the track you're going, that you're getting on with an audit firm that does audits in that industry. Because obviously, if you can do audits in that industry, you're going to be making contacts with all these people that are in that industry. And then B, you may just by virtue of who you're specifically auditing. Now, there are some rules about how long you have to wait since you've been on an audit before you can accept a position somewhere, if you're talking about these big Fortune 500 companies. But you still will end up a lot of times working at one of the firms that or one of the companies that you did audits for. So just keep that in mind while you guys are deciding what you want to do with your careers. I'm not a huge fan of these models. I'll let you look at the slides that have them. A model just means, in academia, it means a drawing, basically. An illustration, I should say. I don't get a lot out of this particular one. Maybe you guys do. There's an audit committee that's formed from part of the board of directors, and is essentially the point of contact overseeing all things audit within, if you're talking at least about these big companies, public companies, organizes all things audit within that particular entity. With that being said about the fact that I'm not a huge fan of these models, the auditing portion of the CPA exam is a huge fan of these models. And they don't necessarily ask you to draw them out, but a lot of the content on the audit exam lends itself very well to slides like this with bubbles, and each one being a particular category. But to me, they're kind of amorphous. They don't really tell you anything. You're like, okay, I see a picture of these things. And they're all kind of vague. They don't really help me a lot. We got another one, though. This is for business processes. And you will, I guarantee, on the CPA exam, end up having to know all of these. So if these slides like this help you to memorize stuff, by all means, take a look at them. Here we have another model that's, while I understand what they're saying just because I know what's going on in corporate governance, this just looks like a merry-go-round. This does nothing for me. So hopefully this helps you all out. But basically this is a way of looking at the way corporate governance is structured, or at least how it fits into the overall business cycle. These are various accounting standard setting boards or entities that affect the accounting profession in one way or another. Obviously, if you are a publicly traded company, then these top two are very important for you because they essentially set out everything and tell you everything that you need to do. All things accounting and what your responsibilities are as a publicly traded company come from here, essentially. You've got the FASB that issues GAAP, AICPA in charge of the CPA exam, and then you've got your kind of international contemporary or international counterparts to some of these other standard boards. All right. Yeah, I don't have a lot else to say about this particular one. Obviously, Public Company Accounting Oversight Board is okay. I was just talking about Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. Obviously, is specific to public companies. As far as auditing standards go, the Auditing Standards Board sets the same type of standards for anyone else who's getting a GAAP audit, at least within the United States. And then the IAASB sets those for the international standards. Here we go. Some more A of the fun acronyms that accounting brings to us, and B, more lists and various things you need to memorize. You will have to definitely memorize this for the CPA exam. Generally accepted auditing standards, not to be confused with GAAP, but if we call generally accepted accounting principles GAAP, it stands to reason that we're going to call generally accepted auditing standards GAS. So, you get to call this GAS every time you talk about it as an auditor. Yippee. So within GAS, There are 10 generally accepted standards that fall into these 3 categories, 3 in 2 of them, and 4 in another. You will have to memorize what they are and kind of understand what each of those little one-word items mean. So this would be a good slide to give you an idea of what each of those means, so that if you use, if you use these types of slides or these types of non-descriptive titles for your memorizing, you should at least kind of understand the stuff that would flesh that out and explain it better, so that you know what each one of those actually means. Again, obviously you're not going to need to have the exact wording of these memorized, but it is important to know what are the principles underlying an audit. The main purpose is to express an opinion on the financial statements prepared by the management. Do these accurately portray what's going on with the company? Then we have other principles that we need to bring up or touch upon that have to do with the audit. Responsibility, performance, and reporting. So who has the responsibilities, who's doing what, and then finally, how does it all get written up in the end? So SAS, or Statements on Auditing Standards, are basically further detail, further explanation to slightly ambiguous general standards for auditing. So between GAS and SAS, you get essentially the, like it says there, essentially the minimum standards that are required to do an audit. So if you're a publicly traded company, they have adopted GAS and SAS, and then they also have some auditing standards that they've essentially used to add to those. Okay, so this slide's basically talking, if you're looking at these standards, how do you read them? And I think it helps better to look at what some of the actual numbering is, which you can see right here. Why is that important? Well, there are some components on the CPA exam, if for no other reason, that are called simulations that, might be, for instance, hey, I don't know, take a look at these items and, do an audit plan or something like that. Some way of doing some actual accounting work, or what these simulations are, or at least what they're supposed to be. But anyway, for these simulations, they give you access to a lot of the statutory information on the standards. But you have to be able to go in and looking at it via these section numbers and content titles, under time stress, be able to go in and kind of look up what you need to know. So basically, it helps to know most of it ahead of time, but things that you don't know or you're not specifically sure of, it's a great advantage if you are at least familiar with how these things look. Okay. What is ethics and professionalism? Well, I'll read this to you in case I've bored you to sleep and your eyes hurt too bad. Ethics refers to a system or code of conduct based on moral duties and obligations that indicate how we should behave, while professionalism refers to the conduct, aims, or qualities that characterize a profession or professional person. All professions operate under some type of code of ethics or code of conduct. I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with that statement, unless you caveat that by saying some type of formal or informal code of ethics or code of conduct. Not all professionals have official formal codes of conduct, but a lot of them do. That is true. Yeah, the Code of Professional Conduct for auditing basically touches on principles, rules of conduct, and then finally interpreting those rules. All right, like I said, not a horribly long chapter today. Again, I apologize for having to put it online, but shoot me any emails if you guys have any questions on anything, and I'll stay in touch and update with any other additional information that I have for you all. All right, have a good one.